Good evening, community. As always, thank you for letting us bring you the following stories and for continuing to be the driving force behind this project that seeks to keep our tales alive, our stories, one ghost story at a time. We hope you can listen in the best way possible, that you can make yourselves comfortable and let yourselves be carried away while staying alert for any strange sounds. Please, pay close attention. Remember that fear attracts fear, and you might be the protagonist of the next episode of Tales of the Night.
The protagonist of the next episode of
Sit to air. I have no problem with you mentioning my name and the location of the events. The story isn't mine, but it was experienced and narrated by my former teacher. It might not be very long, and someone might say it has nothing paranormal about it, but it's an event that I still can't explain. I'm from Mexico City, more specifically from Gustavo Madero. 7 years ago, in 2017, I enrolled in a preparatory course for secondary school admission. I don't remember the exact schedule, but it covered the afternoon and evening. The place where I took it was almost on the corner of the street that crosses with Pedro Negrete in the Martín Carrera neighborhood. I describe this because that neighborhood holds thousands of similar stories. One night around 7 or so, while we were finishing the day's final topics, we heard a noise coming from outside the classroom. Perhaps insignificant, but it led the professor to tell us about the stories he had experienced in that area. He told us that one early morning, he and his brother were on the roof of that establishment, just hanging out, so to speak. They suddenly heard what seemed to be the galloping of horses, something extremely strange, as the area is completely urbanized with no such animals around. It wasn't long before they could observe that what was approaching, coming down Pedro Negrete Street, was a carriage, pulled by 2 horses and driven by what appeared to be a person in a black robe. This carriage seemed to be an exact model of those used in colonial times, and as it advanced, they could hear dogs barking in the street, as if announcing its arrival. The professor told us that although it was inexplicable, it didn't cause terror, as he had witnessed similar events in that same neighborhood. For those who are from Mexico City, you'll know that perhaps due to the energy charge of this place, it's even common when people say they see objects and even people from past eras. The carriage stopped for a few seconds after passing the street, then continued on its way and was never heard from again. And this would have remained just another apparition. But the curious thing, the inexplicable thing, is that the next morning my professor woke up to the news that a woman on the street had been found dead. More specifically, they found her at the corner where the carriage had stopped the night before, that carriage that was never seen again. It could have been a coincidence, of course, but if not, he came to believe that the apparition might have been, I don't know, perhaps some kind of death omen, of the death that was about to occur. Hello, Tales of the Night. Truth is, I hesitated a lot about sending you this story, but after talking with my sister and my uncles, we decided not to let our stories get lost as just another family tale. I'll change some details like names, but I'll be quite descriptive, since what happens in that land has no explanation to this day. Here's my story. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, grew up in a place far from civilization called El Tibor. Although it's currently known as a crime hotspot, in the past, it was a quiet and mysterious place. As he himself used to tell us, there were shamans, witches, and nahuals. Even in our family, a great-great-grandmother was a known witch in this place. When my grandfather was 17, he left there in search of more opportunities to fulfill his dream of becoming a chef. With family support, he reached a coastal city a few hours away, whether by donkey or horse. And there he settled. He formed a family with the woman who would be my grandmother, a very loving but submissive young woman. And although my grandfather had a machista mentality back then, he protected her a lot. They had their first child when she was already of legal age. Between the 2 of them, they looked for a place to live, and my grandfather found a fairly large plot of land, away from neighbors, in a town near the city. He didn't know much about that town, but the view was beautiful, and it seemed suitable for raising the children who would later be my uncles. My aunt, the eldest, got together with someone at 15, while my uncle, a 10-year-old boy, helped my grandmother with cleaning and taking care of his sister. He was always watching over them, protecting them when my grandfather came home drunk and angry. The typical family in a closed town, the typical dynamic. My grandmother was very small and thin. Although she passed away when I was just 6 or 9 months old, I don't remember the exact details. She was always present in my memory through the infinite stories they told me about her. Among all those stories, there was one that left me completely frozen when I was 16. When my mom had my younger sister, currently an 8-year-old girl, I was in secondary school. However, due to a series of unfortunate events, I had to leave school in my second year of high school. My mom always said that my siblings and I were different from other children, but we didn't pay attention until we grew up. You see, we can see, hear, feel, and smell things that others can't. We are 4 siblings. My older brother can see things, but he says he never distinguishes shapes, just shadows with bright eyes. My sister hears things and sometimes has felt these entities touch her. My younger sister is even more specific. She sees a man completely in black, with a hat, with bright red eyes, but he only appears to her in her dreams. And I, by twist of fate, can do all of that. I can see them. I can touch them. I can hear them, smell them. And this is my greatest fear, because only by looking into their eyes can I identify if they are alive or dead. My grandmother used to tell a repetitive story about a white-skinned woman, dressed in black with dark hair and bright red eyes. This woman used to stand at the door of the hut at night and visited her more frequently whenever my grandmother was pregnant. My grandfather had his version too. In his case, he saw a black dog with red eyes and a 4-fingered hand at the end of its tail. This dog would follow him from the house to the edge of town when he went to work in the city. It was never hostile, according to him. My older aunt also saw the dog, but my uncle saw the woman. From the 3rd uncle onwards, things changed, and it was that at some point, from the 10-year-old child to the youngest at 1, they would wake up with bruises, bites, and scratches. No one understood why, but after discussing it, they concluded it was the work of either the dog or the woman. They decided to bless the house, but we believe that was a bad decision. When my grandmother died at 40, the town was already quite inhabited. They had gone from 50 to 500 inhabitants. My father was already married, and my older brother and I had already been born. My mom was always very unhappy, partly because of the mistreatment of grandmother and partly because of my brother and me. My younger brother, although very extroverted, was also difficult to deal with. He was a hyperactive child, and after grandmother's death, his behavior began to change. Daily, my brother would come to my side and drag the little box with blankets where I slept, moving me away from certain places. Or later, he would go to my grandparents' house on the same plot and sit on grandfather's bed. He would leave me there sleeping, and when my mom would come to pick me up, he would just repeat, "Here is fine. Nothing will happen to him here." But in the end, they always hit him for being disobedient. I had to watch as they always took me back to the house at the end of the plot. He tells me that when he became aware of his existence, he also became aware of something bad that separated from my side of the bed, something that seemed to suffocate me, and he would see that it hurt me, but that it always ended when we reached my grandparents' house. There, they didn't attack me. There, nothing suffocated me. When I was 5 years old and he was 7, I also became aware. Since then, I have remained quiet, scared. My mom thought it could be autism or Asperger's, but she never took me to the doctor. I was like that because I saw terrifying things all over that cursed plot of land. Over time, I learned that in my grandfather's house was where the least strange things happened. That's why I took refuge there. My grandfather liked that. My mom said I looked like my grandmother and would tell me stories about her life, always deeply regretting how he had treated her in the past. When my sister was born, I was 7 years old, and along with my older brother, we took great care of her. It didn't take long for me to realize that her eyes followed the same movements I saw. She followed the same things I saw. It seemed she could perceive the same strange things I could. That's why I often covered her eyes or carried her to my grandfather to keep her away from all that. But outside the house, strange things seemed to gather. However, my greatest fear became reality when I was just 10 years old. One afternoon, while walking distracted, I bumped into something. I thought it was a family member, but when I looked up, I froze. In front of me was a man between 30 and 50 years old, with a beard, gray skin, a large shirt like an overcoat, and a straw hat. His eyes were red, lifeless. He was staring at me very intently. I had no doubt. He wasn't alive. But the worst part was that I knew I had touched him. I ran with all my might to my grandfather's house and refused to leave there. However, when my dad arrived from work around midnight, he decided that I should return to our house. Despite my resistance, he carried me and took me. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen, but since then things got worse. Every time I went out on the street, I saw things following me between the alleys, the windows of houses and dark places in town. There was always someone watching me, and nothing, absolutely nothing, resembled anything human. The most frequent and terrifying ones were deformed. They were masses of putrid flesh with opaque eyes, hands and legs in places where they shouldn't be. Others, the majority, were small, with large heads and tiny bodies. These last ones were the most mischievous. They would knock things over, pull hair, damage clothes, bite dogs, and hurt cats. But the most disturbing were those that appeared human. Children, men, women, and elderly. They looked normal, but they were the ones that scared me the most, because it was almost impossible to distinguish them from real people. When my dad moved to another state, I stayed in the house with my mother and my 2 siblings. Although my dad spent a lot of time in grandmother's house, the 3 of us managed on our own, and we shared our experiences. One night, my brother brought his mattress to our room. My sister and I slept in the bed and he on the floor. That morning, while preparing my backpack for secondary school, I heard movement in the bathroom. I assumed my sister was there. As I passed by, I saw half of her face peeking out from behind the curtain. I told her I was leaving, and she responded with an icy, unfamiliar voice. "Yes, be careful." Without giving it much importance, I went out to the yard, but when I reached the gate, I remembered I had forgotten my cell phone and went back. When I crossed the door, I noticed something strange in the bathroom again, but ignored it. I entered my room, confident that I recognized every corner despite the darkness. But when I took my cell phone, I touched something hard. I felt a chill. I touched it again, and this time I knew what it was. A foot too small to be my brother's. Panic overwhelmed me. I left the room and saw a figure in the bathroom door. It was a thin woman, with long black hair down to her waist. She looked a lot like my sister, but was taller. I couldn't move. Terror paralyzed me. I could only hear my heartbeat in my ears. I sat on the edge of the bed, hunched over, waiting for dawn. I wished with all my might that this wasn't real. When my dad got up around 7 in the morning, he went to the bathroom without noticing anything strange. I couldn't move or speak. Later, he drove me to secondary school in the car. I tried to ask him if he had seen anything, but his anger at my apparent laziness made me stay quiet. When my younger brother was 3 years old, he had his first encounter with the paranormal. In a dream, he saw a large man dressed in black, with red eyes. The man with the hat and red eyes. That forced us to talk among ourselves. My family accepted that something strange was happening on the land where we lived. This being, which we began to identify, appeared in different forms for each of us. Sometimes as a man, as a woman, or even a dog. It always started its journey from the back of my dad's house, passing through the alleys and visiting each home. Although my older relatives preferred to deny what they saw, my siblings and I knew there was something evil there. Shadows and non-human forms stalked us all the time. We knew that nothing we saw belonged to this world. At that time, something else began to happen that marked a before and after in my life. A man with long, bony limbs, with straw-colored skin, and a horrible smell of putrefaction, started following me from a widow's house to mine. He was tall, bald. His stomach seemed rounded. He was always hunched over and emitted an indescribable sound, a mix between deep breathing and a scream that chilled me to the bone. His eyes were hollow. He had no nose, and his elongated mouth seemed like a black abyss, similar to the figure in the painting, The Scream, which I didn't know at the time because we didn't have a television. We were very poor. My dad only managed to buy me an old Nokia phone, already quite used. This entity wasn't like the other things I saw in passing. He seemed to follow me, stalk me. I came to see him under my bed, on the roofs of houses, in the alley. But somehow he managed to enter my home, and the paranormal events intensified. That's how it was all night. Since then, I stopped sleeping well. That is, he was always there, in the corners, crouched, with his legs bent and his hands holding his ankles, always staring at me. I avoided his gaze and focused on the floor. But I couldn't help feeling very bad, feeling drained, feeling a lot of fear. I lost a lot of weight in those days. I locked myself in my house, sunk in depression. My sister would go with my mother to my maternal grandmother's house, and my brother went to work with my father. To not worry anyone, I decided to keep quiet about everything that was happening to me. I entered high school terrified, with emotional problems, with my life being a real chaos. My sister, 2 years younger, talked about the presence of a 3-year-old boy who bothered and scared her. My uncles also mentioned something about the thing with red eyes, but I refused to talk about my personal demon, about that smelly man who followed me. I even started fainting from poor eating and lack of sleep. I remember being tired all the time, and as soon as I set foot in that house, I felt completely exhausted. Regardless of the energy I had before entering, I would collapse on the couch or bed and wake up only until the next day. In the house, you could hear footsteps on the roof, laughter, screams, and finally, in 2019, when the pandemic began, I found the opportunity that seemed like my salvation. My dad offered me work with him in a tortilla shop he had bought. I had never worked before, but I didn't care. My sister and I packed our things. I dropped out of school and practically fled from that house. Almost immediately, I noticed that the lack of energy, sleep problems, and discouragements disappeared, as if they had never existed. The house was left empty. My parents divorced and divided the assets, leaving the land and house abandoned. Just with my mom and a piece of furniture that my grandmother had inherited to me when I was born. And although strange things still happen there, they no longer affect me. Yes, I still see things, but they're not as grotesque or dangerous as what I came to experience in that place. However, when I visit my dad's house, located on my grandfather's land, the lack of energy overwhelms me again. If I stay there for more than 10 minutes, I inevitably fall asleep, no matter what I'm doing. A priest blessed the house, but it didn't work as well as when I did it myself. My sister lived there a year ago, but came back to live with us shortly after, because she also experienced that inexplicable lack of energy. A few months ago, after a fight with our mother, she went back to the house for a while and told me that the entire month was a real nightmare. Things moved by themselves, doors slammed shut, sleep paralysis was constant and terrifying. The voices she heard, even through her phone, were clear, and the words always gave her an unbearable headache. The shadows she saw terrified her. They were in the hallway, in the rooms, in the bathroom, in the living room, in the kitchen, throughout the entire house. She slept with the lights on, but it wasn't enough. The laughter, screams, sobs, and whispers of men, women, and children never ceased. She told me that the things they shouted during her sleep paralysis were,
"Help me. It's here. Save me. You're going to die. Please save me."
It terrified her to hear them. More things have happened, but I tried to be brief. I want to leave you with one last message. They are not good. The spirits, the manifestations, none of them, not even the ones that appear alive, or the ones that look beautiful or kind. Any paranormal thing that manifests itself to you as evil. They're all desperate to return to life and won't hesitate to hurt you. The bites and bruises that my siblings and I suffered weren't a game. If any witch makes you believe otherwise, remember that same witch might have led kind people to meet their end at the hands of these beings. no matter how cordial it may seem to you. I bid farewell. My name is Jefferson Alonzo, and I can tell you that I don't believe seeing ghosts or these manifestations is a gift. On the contrary, it's a curse that will never, ever in life let you spend a single night in peace. Thank you for continuing to listen, community. We love that you join us for each episode and that together, we keep these stories alive. Remember that you can subscribe to the channel, to the podcast, which is very important to us that you do. And of course, also leave us a comment with your opinion. And now, without further ado, I leave you with the next story. You know it. Turn off the lights and let yourself be carried away by this night's tale. Hello, Uriel and the entire community. I want to tell you my story, as I haven't had the opportunity to share it with my family. It seems like a very sensitive topic to me, because it involves something paranormal, something that, although it has always been present in my family, remains very difficult to discuss openly. Since childhood, my family has had a special kind of contact with the supernatural, but it always seemed that my siblings and I were removed from all of that. However, everything changed recently, and this is my story. I recently finished middle school and started high school. This change caused me a lot of emotional stress. I love my middle school classmates, and having to separate from them affected me very deeply. I felt without energy and exhausted, and it was in this state when I began to perceive the presence of something dark. My first encounter with what I believe is an entity occurred one night, when I stayed up late finishing a project. Suddenly, I felt an inexplicable thirst, as if after running a marathon, my body was demanding water. I left my room to go to the kitchen, but when I got to the stairs, I saw it. It was a small figure, very short in height, but with a bulky body, to put it somehow. At first, I thought it was my brother who tends to sleepwalk, but then I observed it carefully. I realized that thing wasn't human. It was twisting in an unnatural way, leaving its back and arms backward, and then it started running down the stairs, making horrifying sounds, as if its bones were cracking with each movement. It was also letting out groans that seemed to be of pain. I was petrified. I had never experienced anything like this, and for a moment I thought maybe someone had broken into the house. But of course it wasn't someone. It was something. The second encounter happened when I was returning home after classes, as I attended the evening shift. I remember I was listening to music when I noticed something was moving in the house next door, which is supposed to be abandoned. At first I thought maybe a new neighbor had arrived, but when I looked carefully, there it was again. That same thing. This time, since it was farther from me, I dared to look at it a little more, to observe it in detail. Its eyes were completely white, and it had something in its mouth. I couldn't make out what it was. Maybe an animal or something worse. I was filled with panic and ran to enter my house. That night, for the first time in my entire life, I prayed. Although I had never done it before, since unlike my family, I am completely atheist. But the worst is that the last encounter was just last week. I was taking a shower, getting ready to go to high school, when I heard someone running throughout the house. I thought it would be my dog, a Belgian shepherd who has lots of energy and loves to play. That's why I didn't give it much importance, until I heard someone calling me by my name. The strange thing is that it wasn't a familiar voice. And besides, my family always calls me by my second name, as I've asked them to. That's when I really started to get scared. That voice called me again. Allison. Where are Bebote and Carlitos? Bebote and Carlitos are two turtles that I adopted with my middle school friends, whom I care about very much. The most disturbing thing of all is that my turtles weren't at home. I had left them with a friend to take care of them for a while, and they won't return to me until January. I felt a chill running down my spine, but I still responded. I don't know. Don't even think about looking for them, because you won't find them. As soon as I said that, I heard something or someone running toward the bathroom. It seemed like they were banging their head against my door. The sound was terrifying, as if that thing was desperate. I didn't know what to do, so I prayed again. And little by little, the banging subsided until finally everything went quiet. I stayed in the bathroom for a good while, paralyzed with fear. At least, since that day, I haven't seen that thing again. And although I don't think I'll be so lucky, I really hope to never see it again.